Welcome back. My name is Terry, and in this video, we're going to talk about what the Bible has to say about slavery. It's amazing how people talk about how the Bible supports slavery, the Bible supports servants, the Bible supports this, but when you take a look at the rules that were laid down, the slave masters in early American history that had the Bible, the only part of the verses they wanted to listen to was the verses that said, I can have a slave. They completely ignored the verses where it said, treat them like one of your own household, make sure you take care of them, don't harm them. If you kill them, you and me are going to have a problem. They just put a blind eye when it came to those things. How should a servant or a slave be treated according to the scriptures? Exodus chapter 23, verse 9. Also thou shalt not oppress a stranger, for ye know the heart of a stranger, seeing ye were strangers in the land of Egypt. When it comes to a person who is a slave or who is a servant, God told Israel, hey, you need to remember what it was like to have that type of life. Do not even think to oppress somebody's life and make it so bad that they cry to me just like you did to be freed. Because the Bible says that God heard the cries of the children of Israel. So right here, we can already see that God is like, even though you're going to have servants and even though you're going to have slaves, there's going to be something different about how I'm going to require that you treat them. Leviticus chapter 19, verses 33 and 34. And if a stranger sojourn with thee in your land, you shall not vex him. But the stranger that dwelleth with you shall be unto you as one born among you, and thou shalt love him as thyself, for ye were strangers in the land of Egypt. When you look at what vex means, it means you shall not treat that person violently. You shall not do them wrong. So already we can see, as compared to American slavery and how people treated servants, God already makes a distinction. You will love him as one of your own. So I'm supposed to take my servant and the stranger that is in my house that's serving me and treat him as one of my own? According to the Bible, we are not supposed to oppress a person. We're not supposed to make the life of the servant or a slave hard. We are supposed to love this individual and treat them as one in our own household. And then the Bible says, I want you to remember what it was like when you was there. That's the most important thing that God keeps bringing up. Remember how bad that type of life was. Exodus chapter 21, verses 26 and 27. And if a man smite the eye of his servant and the eye of his maid, that it perish, he shall let him go free for his eye's sake. And if he smite out his manservant's tooth, or his maidservant's tooth, he shall let him go free for his tooth's sake. You cannot have a slave and do violence to them. You could not harm them up under God's rules. You could not blacken a slave's eye. You could not knock a slave's tooth out. God says if you do that, that slave has the right to go free. Exodus chapter 21, verse 20. And if a man smite his servant or his maid with a rod, and he die under his hand, he shall be surely punished. They used to kill slaves in history, and there was no consequences. God says that if you have a servant or you have a slave or a stranger in your house that is serving you, and you kill that servant, you will be held responsible. Exodus chapter 21, verse 5. And if the servant shall plainly say, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out free. There was a rule that God had in the Old Testament where if a slave was like, hey, I really enjoy serving the master of this house and enjoy serving this family, then that particular servant or slave, what they would do is they would pierce a hole in the ear of the servant. And that symbolized that that particular slave or servant will continue to stay in that household for the remainder of their life. I can't really think of any slave like in history in America who was like, I really like serving master. I think I want to continue with this job opportunity. Like, no, because they were not treated the same way. But you can clearly see just from the couple of verses that we've already gone over that the way God required the treatment of slaves and servants is completely different than how the rest of the world treats their servants. Deuteronomy chapter 23 verses 15 and 16. Thou shalt not deliver unto his master the servant which is escaped from his master unto thee. He shall dwell with thee, even among you, in that place which he shall choose in one of thy gates, where it liketh him best, thou shalt not oppress him. I really thought this was an interesting law because, we always read about Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad and how she helped people escape from slavery. And a lot of times the slaves were caught. And when they were caught, they returned to their masters and they were treated much more harshly than they were before. But God says, in the case where a servant actually flees from a master, so say they were being cruel, God was like, if a slave or servant flees to you from their former master, God says you will not oppress them. Allow them to have room and board in your house. Treat them with respect. Colossians chapter 4 verse 1. Masters, give unto your servants that which is just and equal, knowing that ye also have a master in heaven. Remember, I'm your master, but I want you to think about how good I treat you. Even though you serve me, even though your life is in my hands, the Bible says that God says, the thoughts that I have towards you are to give you an expected end. God says, I'm trying to make sure life is as happy as possible and as good as it can possibly be for you. I hope that going through these scriptures cleared up some of the misconceptions that people have as far as about the Bible and what it teaches about slavery. It was never God's intention that something like American slavery should happen. God cares about all people and all individuals. But the problem is sometimes, people misrepresent God. And that seems to be one of the biggest things when it comes to this subject. So I've spoken with people before and they were adamant about, this is the white man's Bible and he promotes this and promotes that. But clearly when you get into it and you start looking at it, you see that, this is not the same thing that God wanted that happened earlier in history. This is something completely different.